On the morning of April 3, 1974, an ominous tension gripped much of the central and eastern United States. Residents across the Ohio Valley and the Deep South woke to a humid, unsettled atmosphere, unaware that within hours their lives would be irrevocably changed. This was not just another spring storm day. It would become one of the darkest chapters in American weather history. By the time the sun rose on April 4th, the skies would have unleashed the most violent tornado outbreak ever recorded. Over an 18-hour stretch, 148 tornadoes would tear across 13 states, ranging from Michigan to Mississippi, and even reaching into Ontario, Canada. Of those, a staggering 30 would be rated EF4 or EF5 on the Fujita scale, representing the most violent tornadoes possible. The sheer volume of destruction is difficult to comprehend. More than 330 people would be killed, over 6,000 injured, and tens of thousands left without homes. The storm system carved a path of ruin nearly 2,600 miles long, an unrelenting, chaotic barrage from the skies. This wasn't just a natural disaster, it was a meteorological assault. Communities were leveled in seconds, entire neighborhoods wiped clean, and cities like Xenia, Ohio, and Brandenburg, Kentucky would be forever changed. The 1974 super outbreak remains a landmark in severe weather history, not just for its scale, but for what it revealed about our vulnerability to atmospheric forces beyond control. To understand how such a massive disaster could occur, we must examine the forces behind it, the perfect meteorological recipe that would turn an ordinary spring day into an unprecedented catastrophe. To truly grasp the terrifying force behind the 1974 super outbreak, we need to look at the atmospheric conditions that came together like pieces of a deadly puzzle. In early April 1974, a powerful low-pressure system was steadily intensifying over the North American interior plains. This deepening cyclone acted like a vast engine, driving the severe weather. From the Gulf of Mexico, an unusually strong surge of warm, moist air pushed northward, flooding the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys, with the fuel needed to power violent storms. At the same time, cold, dry air was descending from Canada, creating a sharp temperature contrast, a key ingredient in storm development. But what really set this event apart was the extreme wind shear. From the surface all the way up to the jet stream, wind speeds and directions shifted dramatically, generating the spin needed for supercell thunderstorms, the breeding ground of the most violent tornadoes. Radar and satellite imagery from April 3rd revealed a classic comma-shaped storm system, a signature of explosive weather setups. Forecasters, using technology from the 1950s, knew severe weather was likely, but they could not predict the sheer scale or intensity that was coming. So overwhelmed were they by the rapidly multiplying tornado reports that weather officials in Indiana issued a tornado warning for the entire state. A historic first and only time such a statewide alert has ever been given. This volatile mix of warm, cold, and rapidly shifting winds created the perfect environment for tornadoes to form in unprecedented numbers. It was nature's perfect storm, and it was about to wreak havoc like never before. The 1974 super outbreak didn't start with a bang. It began quietly, almost deceptively calm. The first tornado touched down in Indiana just before 10 o'clock in the morning on April 3rd. But as the day warmed, the atmosphere became more and more unstable, setting the stage for a terrifying escalation. By early afternoon, tornado activity intensified rapidly. Across states like Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee, tornadoes began forming in quick succession. At one point, as many as 15 tornadoes were simultaneously on the ground, twisting and tearing through the landscape. Some of these storms moved at blistering speeds of nearly 60 miles per hour, giving residents precious little time to react or take shelter. One harrowing incident occurred in Kennard, Indiana, where an F4 tornado struck an elementary school. Though the building's upper floors were ripped away, many students survived by taking refuge in the basement, highlighting the critical importance of proper shelter during tornadoes. Meanwhile, in Decatur, Illinois, witnesses reported seeing two separate funnels twisting down as a tornado tore through homes and businesses, intensifying the chaos. Emergency centers and weather offices were inundated with reports, creating a chaotic stream of incoming data that was difficult to process in real time. This early stage was only a grim prelude to the devastation that would grow exponentially in the hours ahead. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began its descent, the The super outbreak reached its most violent and destructive phase. A series of powerful, long-lived tornadoes carved terrifying paths across the Ohio Valley and into the Deep South. One of the standout tornadoes touched down near Monticello, Indiana, around 4:50 p.m. This F4 tornado tracked for an astonishing 109 miles, making it one of the longest tornado paths of the entire outbreak. It devastated the downtown area of Monticello and killed 19 people along its route, leaving a trail of shattered homes and uprooted trees. Shortly before 3:30 p.m. Central Time, a massive F5 tornado formed in Kentucky and charged towards Brandenburg, a small town on the Ohio River. Unlike the typical thin funnel shape, witnesses described it as a solid wall of black cloud and debris stretching nearly half a mile wide. With estimated winds exceeding 250 miles per hour, it obliterated much of Brandenburg, wiping out well-built houses down to their foundations. Tragically, 31 people lost their lives in this one tornado, with 18 fatalities concentrated along a single street. This remains the only F5 tornado ever recorded in Kentucky's history. Meanwhile, Louisville, Kentucky, faced its own nightmare. When an F4 tornado tore through parts of the city shortly after 4:30 p.m., the tornado damaged numerous buildings, including iconic landmarks like Churchill Downs Racetrack, bringing the outbreak's destruction directly into a major urban area. The most infamous tornado of the day struck Xenia, Ohio at 4:40 p.m. This catastrophic F5 tornado ripped through the city of approximately 25,000 residents. The devastation was staggering. 34 people died, more than 1,600 were injured, and nearly half of Xenia's buildings were destroyed or severely damaged. 7 of the city's 12 schools were completely demolished. Survivor stories tell of homes disintegrating around families as the roar of the tornado sounded like a squadron of jet engines. Mike DeWine, then a young prosecutor and future governor of Ohio, sheltered in his basement office, convinced he would not survive. As evening fell, the destruction spread southward. In Alabama, 2 powerful tornadoes followed nearly the same path just 30 minutes apart. These twin storms killed 55 people combined. One home was struck by both tornadoes, first losing its roof, then being completely blown away by the second. The F5 tornado that devastated Gwynn, Alabama, stayed on the ground for almost 2 hours, causing 28 fatalities and immense destruction. This peak period was the deadliest and most intense phase of the outbreak, forever marking April 3rd, 1974, as one of the darkest days in American weather history. When the final tornado dissipated early on April 4th, 1974, the full extent of the super outbreak's destruction became chillingly clear. Over the course of approximately 18 hours, 148 tornadoes had touched down across 13 U.S. states, stretching from the Midwest to the Southeast and even into Ontario, Canada. Of these tornadoes, an unprecedented 30 were rated F4 or F5, marking them as some of the most violent ever recorded in a single day. 7 of these were F5 tornadoes, the highest rating possible, each representing near total devastation along their paths. The human toll was immense and heartbreaking. The death count reached 335, with thousands more injured. Official estimates placed the number of injured between 5,484 and 6,142 people. Entire families and communities were shattered in minutes. Property damage was equally staggering. More than 15,000 homes and buildings were destroyed, while an additional 17,000 sustained damage. This left tens of thousands of people displaced and struggling to rebuild their lives amid the rubble. Financially, the disaster inflicted approximately $600 million in damage at the time, which, when adjusted for inflation, amounts to roughly $3.8 billion in today's currency. The combined path length of all tornadoes spanned nearly 2,600 miles, the equivalent of driving from New York City to Las Vegas. In response to the crisis, then-President Richard Nixon declared 10 states federal disaster areas, opening the door for federal aid and support. The widespread damage affected not only rural communities, but also towns and cities across multiple states, underscoring the outbreak's overwhelming scale. These numbers tell a story of immense power, loss, and the extraordinary challenge faced by those who lived through the 1974 super outbreak. In the immediate hours following the tornado outbreak, the devastation overwhelmed emergency services and local communities alike. Power lines were downed. communication systems failed, and roads were blocked by debris, making rescue efforts difficult. Yet amid the chaos, neighbors became first responders, offering shelter, food, and aid to those trapped or injured. In towns like Brandenburg, Kentucky, survivors used whatever means they had, old trucks, farm equipment, and anything available, to clear debris and search for loved ones. The local fairgrounds transformed into makeshift shelters and aid stations as displaced residents sought refuge from the cold night. Search and rescue teams, including National Guard units and volunteers, arrived from across affected states. They combed through rubble piles that once were homes, schools, and businesses, hoping to find survivors. The scenes were haunting. Entire neighborhoods reduced to concrete slabs and twisted metal, vehicles crushed and scattered, and personal belongings strewn across fields for miles. Beyond physical destruction, the psychological impact on survivors was profound. Many experienced lasting trauma and anxiety, particularly during storms in the years that followed. Reports of nightmares and a pervasive sense of vulnerability became common. The event shattered the sense of safety that many had taken for granted. Relief organizations like the American Red Cross and Salvation Army mobilized quickly to provide food, clothing, and medical care. State and federal aid programs helped families begin the long and difficult process of rebuilding. For many, the super outbreak was not just a natural disaster, but a life-altering event that tested the resilience and spirit of entire communities. The bonds formed in those dark days became the foundation for recovery and hope. The 1974 super outbreak left a lasting legacy that reshaped how meteorologists understand and respond to tornadoes. The massive scale and intensity of the outbreak revealed serious limitations in the technology and warning systems of the time. In the years that followed, the National Weather Service underwent a major transformation. The outdated radar technology was replaced by Doppler radar, capable of detecting wind rotation inside storms. This breakthrough gave forecasters critical early warning signs, improving tornado detection and warning lead times significantly. Emergency communication systems were upgraded nationwide. NOAA weather radio coverage expanded, delivering continuous storm alerts directly to the public. This allowed for faster, more precise warnings and helped save lives in future events. The outbreak also fueled advances in tornado research. Scientists studied the 1974 storm extensively, gaining new insights into tornado formation, structure, and behavior. These studies helped refine tornado intensity scales and improve storm prediction models. Perhaps most importantly, the super outbreak changed public awareness and preparedness. It underscored the importance of community drills, storm shelters, and education about tornado safety. Many schools and homes now include designated safe rooms, a practice that became widespread due to lessons learned from this disaster. Though the tornadoes of April 3rd and 4th claimed hundreds of lives and devastated thousands of communities, their legacy is one of resilience and progress. The science and safety measures developed in response to this catastrophe continue to protect millions today. The 1974 super outbreak remains a stark reminder of nature's power and a testament to human determination to understand, prepare for, and survive even the most violent storms. The story of the 2011 super outbreak didn't begin on April 27th. It started days earlier, as the atmosphere was quietly gearing up for one of the most violent weather events in American history. On April 25th, a powerful dip in the jet stream carved a deep trough over the central United States. This created the perfect setup by pulling warm, moist air northward from the Gulf of Mexico, while cold, fast-moving air raced overhead. The collision of these air masses generated extreme wind shear, a crucial factor that causes thunderstorms to spin, developing into deadly supercells. That day, tornadoes began touching down, including a deadly EF2 wedge tornado near Valonia, Arkansas, which tragically claimed 4 lives. Across the region, storms caused widespread damage and raised alarms among meteorologists. The next day, April 26th, the system intensified as dozens more tornadoes formed across Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas, and beyond. The atmosphere became increasingly unstable, with a growing mix of heat and moisture feeding the storms, while strong winds high in the atmosphere continued to create the conditions for violent rotation. The Storm Prediction Center recognized the severity early on and issued high-risk severe weather outlooks for several southern states, warning residents of the potential for long-track, intense tornadoes. This was no ordinary spring storm. It was a rare and deadly combination of meteorological forces coming together to set the stage for an unprecedented outbreak. For millions in the path of these storms, the looming question was simple and urgent. How could they survive what was coming next? The calm before the storm on the morning of April 27th was deceiving. Before sunrise, a powerful line of storms swept across Mississippi and Alabama, not as isolated supercells, but as a fierce squall line, hiding tornadoes within its fury. Around 5 o'clock in the morning, an EF3 tornado tore through Cordova, Alabama, causing severe damage and knocking out power to thousands of residents. This early assault severely hampered communication and warning systems, leaving many communities vulnerable as the day progressed. As the sun rose, the clouds briefly parted, allowing sunlight to warm the ground and fuel the atmosphere's instability. This warming, combined with the moist air from the Gulf of Mexico, created an explosive environment ready to unleash violent storms. By late morning, scattered supercells began forming, each a potential tornado factory. Tornado warnings steadily increased, a chilling signal that the worst was yet to come. For those living in the affected areas, the morning was a tense wait as the atmosphere charged toward catastrophe. By early afternoon on April 27th, conditions had become a perfect storm for destruction. Around 2:30 p.m. Central Daylight Time, the first EF5 tornado of the outbreak touched down near Philadelphia, Mississippi. This violent twister remained on the ground for nearly 29 miles, devastating everything in its path, scouring Earth and claiming 3 lives. Almost simultaneously, an EF4 tornado slammed into Cullman, Alabama, ripping through the city's downtown with terrifying force. Live news footage captured the swirling vortex, a dark funnel filled with debris and destruction. Across Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee, supercells churned out long-track tornadoes with unprecedented speed and frequency, averaging 6 new tornadoes every 30 minutes. Nearly 90% of the supercells that day spawned tornadoes, shattering typical outbreak statistics and showcasing the extreme efficiency of this violent storm system. At 3:05 p.m. Central Daylight Time on April 27th, one of the most catastrophic tornadoes of the outbreak touched down in Marion County, Alabama. This tornado would become infamous as the Hackleburg-Phil Campbell tornado, carving a path on the ground for an astonishing 132 miles, over 2.5 hours. It intensified rapidly, reaching EF5 status, with estimated wind speeds of 210 miles per hour. Entire neighborhoods in Hackleburg vanished, including the complete destruction of a Wrangler denim plant and local schools. The tornado maintained this deadly intensity as it swept through Phil Campbell, where well-built brick homes were obliterated and cars were hurled hundreds of yards, many never recovered. This single twister was responsible for 72 deaths, ranking it among the deadliest tornadoes in Alabama's history. Almost simultaneously, another EF5 tornado struck Smithville, Mississippi. With winds measured at 205 miles per hour, it leveled 18 homes, debarked trees, and killed over a dozen people, leaving devastation in its wake. Perhaps the most infamous supercell of the outbreak was the one that produced the Tuscaloosa-Birmingham tornado. This storm traveled an incredible 380 miles from Mississippi all the way to North Carolina, lasting over 7 hours. At 4:43 p.m., it unleashed its most destructive tornado, a massive wedge that grew up to 1.5 miles wide as it slammed into Tuscaloosa. The tornado tore across major roads and commercial districts, destroying stores, restaurants, and apartment complexes. Debris was hurled so far that it was later found over 20 miles away in Birmingham. Maintaining EF4 strength, the tornado devastated Tuscaloosa's suburbs and northern Birmingham before finally dissipating. The death toll reached 64, with damage costs estimated at $2.4 billion, making it the costliest tornado in United States history at that time. The apocalyptic imagery of flattened city blocks and stripped forests painted a haunting picture of nature's power unleashed. This peak period of the outbreak included 3 confirmed F5 tornadoes, a rare and deadly cluster that left entire communities wiped from the map across Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. When the sun rose on April 28th, the true scale of destruction became painfully clear. Although tornado activity continued sporadically in states from Florida to New York, the most violent, phase of the outbreak had ended. Across those 4 days, a total of 362 tornadoes were confirmed, with the overwhelming majority touching down on April 27th. The death toll reached 348 people, including 324 deaths directly caused by tornadoes, making it one of the deadliest tornado outbreaks in United States history. Alabama was the hardest hit state, with 238 tornado-related fatalities and more than 2,200 injuries. Entire towns had been decimated, and communities were left grappling with unimaginable loss. The combined damage estimates for the outbreak approached $11 billion, securing its place as the costliest tornado outbreak ever recorded in the country. The physical destruction was staggering. On just April 27th alone, the combined tornado paths stretched over 1,200 miles. Cities like Tuscaloosa and Hackleburg were reduced to rubble, forests were stripped bare, and critical infrastructure was devastated. Power outages affected hundreds of thousands, with some areas in Alabama experiencing blackouts lasting weeks due to damaged transmission lines. Emergency responders and search and rescue teams worked tirelessly in the days following, sifting through debris for survivors and recovering those who had lost their lives. In Tuscaloosa alone, debris removal costs exceeded $100 million. Beyond the visible scars on the landscape, the emotional toll on survivors and communities was profound and enduring. The 2011 super outbreak was not just a meteorological disaster, it was a human tragedy that tested the resilience of entire regions. In the years since the 2011 super outbreak, the hardest hit communities have shown remarkable strength and determination in their recovery efforts. The scale of destruction prompted advances in meteorological research, leading to improved forecasting techniques and earlier warnings. These improvements have helped save countless lives in the years that followed by giving people more time to seek shelter. Emergency management agencies also revisited their preparedness plans, focusing on community education and resilience. Many regions invested in stronger building codes and expanded storm shelter programs aiming to reduce vulnerability to future tornadoes. The outbreak underscored the critical importance of early warnings and communication infrastructure, especially in rural areas where access to real-time alerts can be limited. While the outbreak set grim records such as the highest number of tornadoes in a single day and the costliest damage in U.S. history, it also highlighted the human spirit's capacity to endure. Survivors shared stories of courage and kindness amid devastation, inspiring ongoing efforts to support those affected. Memorials and annual remembrances keep the memory of the victims alive, reminding us all of the power and unpredictability of nature. So just how devastating was the 2011 super outbreak? It was a once-in-a-lifetime meteorological catastrophe that reshaped not only landscapes, but also emergency response strategies nationwide. The lessons learned continue to influence tornado preparedness today, helping communities face the future with greater knowledge and resilience. In the final week of March in the year 2023, meteorologists at the Storm Prediction Center were growing increasingly uneasy. Weather models were showing a rapidly developing low-pressure system poised to strengthen over the Central Plains. As early as March 28th, forecasters noted the signs of a rare, high-impact event. Elevated instability, anomalous wind patterns, and an intensifying jet stream all aligned with textbook parameters for a large-scale tornado outbreak. The atmospheric ingredients were converging in a way that had not been seen in years. By Thursday, March 30th, the Storm Prediction Center issued a Day 2 outlook that was difficult to ignore. It included a Level 4 moderate risk for parts of the Midwest and Mississippi Valley, accompanied by strong wording suggesting a significant tornado threat. Analysts warned of possible long-track, intense tornadoes, the kind that can stay on the ground for dozens of miles and leave towns in ruins. As the models became clearer, that outlook was upgraded even further. On Friday morning, March 31st, the SPC did something rare. It issued a high risk for severe weather, the first such designation in over 2 years. This high-risk zone was split into 2 distinct regions. The northern area covered parts of eastern Iowa, western Illinois, and northeastern Missouri. The southern risk zone spanned across the Mississippi Valley, including portions of Arkansas, Tennessee, and Mississippi. Both were flagged for the potential of EF2, or stronger tornadoes, with the dreaded hatched risk indicating the possibility of intense, long-lasting storms. CAPE values, a measure of how unstable the air is, were forecast to reach as high as 1,500 joules per kilogram. That meant the atmosphere was packed with the energy needed for explosive thunderstorm development, but energy alone wasn't the problem. Wind shear, the change in wind direction and speed with height, was forecast to be dangerously high. Jet stream winds roaring over 60 knots added rotation to any developing storms, priming them for supercell formation. Supercells are the most dangerous thunderstorm type and the only kind that consistently produce violent tornadoes. Add to this a strong surface low over Nebraska, pulling in warm, moist Gulf air, and you have a volatile environment with all the makings of a high-end tornado event. By mid-morning on March 31st, meteorologists were sounding the alarm. Tornado watches were issued across a vast swath of the Midwest and South. These weren't just standard alerts. They came with strong wording about the likelihood of intense tornadoes, large hail, and destructive straight-line winds. Public safety officials, schools, and emergency responders across multiple states were preparing for the worst. For those watching closely, it was clear the United States was about to experience one of the most dangerous tornado outbreaks in recent memory. The clock was ticking. By the early afternoon of Friday, March 31st, the atmosphere across the central United States had grown increasingly unstable. Temperatures surged into the mid-70s and low 80s across parts of the Mississippi Valley, while dew points climbed well into the 60s, a clear sign of rich Gulf-sourced moisture. Across Missouri, Iowa, and Arkansas, satellite imagery showed towering cumulus clouds beginning to break through the cap, that thin layer of warm air that usually suppresses storm formation. It would not take long for these clouds to explode into rotating supercells. At around 12:45 p.m. Central Daylight Time, the first tornado warnings were issued in eastern Iowa as a fast-developing supercell began showing signs of rotation on radar near Wapello County. Moments later, a confirmed tornado touched down near the town of Ottumwa. This tornado would quickly grow in strength and size, carving a damaging path across farmland and rural roads. It was the first of many. Within the next 2 hours, additional supercells developed rapidly across northern Missouri and central Illinois. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a particularly violent supercell formed near the city of Keota, Iowa. This storm produced a large wedge-shaped tornado that remained on the ground for nearly 50 minutes, tearing across Johnson, Cedar, and Clinton counties. Preliminary surveys would later rate it as an EF4 tornado, with wind speeds estimated near 170 miles per hour. Barns, silos, and homes were leveled, and entire groves of trees were shredded. Drone footage and ground surveys would reveal damage consistent with some of the strongest tornadoes ever recorded in that region. Farther south in Arkansas, conditions were rapidly deteriorating. At approximately 4:20 p.m., a powerful supercell entered the western suburbs of Little Rock. Within minutes, a tornado touched down in Pulaski County, growing rapidly in size and strength. It moved directly into the heart of the Little Rock metro area, causing widespread destruction across neighborhoods, schools, and businesses. Power lines snapped, vehicles were tossed, and countless homes were reduced to rubble. Emergency managers declared a mass casualty incident as first responders began searching through the wreckage. The National Weather Service office in Little Rock issued a rare tornado emergency for parts of the metro area, underscoring the life-threatening nature of the storm. Tornado emergencies are only issued when a large, violent tornado is confirmed to be impacting a densely populated area. That warning would be one of more than 20 issued across the state of Arkansas alone over the course of the afternoon and evening. Supercells were tracking northeast at over 50 miles per hour, giving residents very little time to react. As the sun began to set, tornado activity showed no signs of slowing down. Multiple long-track tornadoes were simultaneously active in Iowa, Illinois, and Tennessee. Cities such as Covington, Wynne, and Belvidere were either under tornado warnings or recovering from recent impacts. Power outages were spreading, cell service was being disrupted, and the scope of the disaster was growing by the hour. March 31st was quickly becoming one of the most active and destructive tornado days the United States had experienced in over a decade, and the night was still ahead, as darkness fell across the Midwest and South on the evening of Friday. March 31st, the tornado threat intensified. After sunset, supercells maintained their strength and continued spawning destructive tornadoes in multiple states. Nighttime tornadoes are especially dangerous because they are harder to see, people are less likely to receive warnings, and emergency response becomes far more difficult. By 7 o'clock that evening, the Storm Prediction Center had issued a particularly dangerous situation tornado watch across a large swath of the lower Ohio and mid-Mississippi valleys, including western Tennessee, southeastern Missouri, and parts of northern Mississippi and Kentucky. At approximately 7:30 p.m. Central Daylight Time, a powerful tornado touched down just outside of Wynne, Arkansas. It rapidly intensified and tore through the center of town, leaving a path of destruction nearly a half-mile wide. Multiple structures were flattened, including homes, schools, and local businesses. The roof of Wynne High School was torn off and debris was scattered for miles. First responders from surrounding counties rushed in, but downed trees and power lines made access difficult. Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders would later describe Wynne as basically cut in half by the tornado. Farther north in Illinois, storm spotters reported a large tornado approaching the town of Belvedere around 7:45 p.m. The twister struck the area just as a concert was taking place inside the Apollo Theater, a historic venue downtown. The building's roof collapsed under the force of the winds, trapping dozens of people inside. Emergency crews worked through the night under the glow of floodlights and sirens, pulling survivors from the rubble. This event became one of the most widely reported tragedies of the outbreak due to the number of people affected in a single location. In Tennessee, a long-track supercell produced multiple tornadoes throughout the evening hours, including a significant one near the town of Covington. This tornado touched down around 8:15 p.m. and remained on the ground for over 20 miles, destroying homes, overturning vehicles, and uprooting entire sections of forest. Local emergency agencies declared states of emergency in several counties as the damage reports piled in. The darkness combined with heavy rain and ongoing lightning made storm tracking and rescue efforts nearly impossible. Radar data and storm chaser footage confirmed that several tornadoes during the evening were large, rain-wrapped, and nearly impossible to spot without infrared equipment. At one point, over 100 tornado warnings were active across the region. National Weather Service offices were overwhelmed with storm reports, while emergency lines in affected counties were flooded with calls. For many people, warnings arrived just minutes or seconds before impact. The tornado outbreak, now spanning several states in more than 8 hours, was becoming one of the deadliest and most widespread severe weather events of the decade. As midnight approached, the system continued its march eastward, still generating tornadoes and destructive winds. Many residents across the Midwest and South huddled in basements, storm shelters, or interior rooms, waiting out the relentless barrage of storms. For those already hit, the night brought only darkness, sirens, and the rising fear of what the morning light would reveal. When the sun rose on Saturday, April 1st, the true scale of the tornado outbreak came into view. Emergency management teams, journalists, and volunteers poured into devastated towns and cities across more than 10 states. In Arkansas, entire neighborhoods in Wynne and Little Rock resembled war zones. Debris was scattered across highways, utility poles snapped like twigs, and homes were reduced to foundations. For many residents, the silence of the morning was broken only by the sound of helicopters, chainsaws, and distant sirens. Across Illinois, storm survey teams from the National Weather Service began examining damage paths from the previous night. The EF scale was quickly put to use, with initial assessments confirming multiple EF3 tornadoes, and at least one EF4, which had carved a destructive path through central parts of the state. In Belvedere, rescue operations at the collapsed Apollo Theater continued into the morning. One person had been killed and more than 40 others injured when the roof gave way during the concert. Nearby businesses had windows shattered and cars overturned, while power outages left thousands in the dark. In Tennessee and Kentucky, dozens of rural communities reported widespread damage. In Covington, Tennessee, emergency responders went door to door searching for survivors. Aerial drone footage showed homes reduced to rubble and roads blocked by downed trees and overturned semi-trucks. In McNairy County, damage from multiple tornadoes stretched for miles, and at least 9 fatalities were confirmed. Emergency shelters were set up in schools, churches, and fire stations as displaced families sought safety. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, known as FEMA, activated disaster response units to assist with search and rescue, medical aid, and infrastructure damage assessment. President Joe Biden was briefed early that morning and approved emergency declarations for several states by midday. National Guard units were deployed to assist overwhelmed local agencies, especially in the hardest-hit regions of Arkansas and Tennessee. News outlets across the country ran continuous coverage of the destruction, showing drone footage of flattened neighborhoods and interviews with survivors who had lost everything. Meteorologists emphasized how rare it was to see so many violent tornadoes across such a wide area in one event, especially this early in the spring. The scope of the outbreak, stretching from the Mississippi River Valley to the lower Great Lakes, was unlike anything seen in recent years. By mid-morning, official reports confirmed that more than 50 tornadoes had touched down between the evening of March 31st and the early hours of April 1st. Thousands of homes and businesses were damaged or destroyed. Utility companies worked urgently to restore power to more than 500,000 people across multiple states. Rescue workers continued to comb through debris, hoping to find missing residents alive. And despite the clear skies now overhead, the threat of severe weather was not completely over. The storm system was pushing east, with forecasters warning that the southeast could face more damaging winds and possible tornadoes later that afternoon. For many, the new day brought more than just cleanup. It brought uncertainty, grief, and the daunting task of rebuilding what had been lost in a single night. In the days following the tornado outbreak, communities across the central and southern United States began to mobilize recovery efforts. Relief organizations, including the American Red Cross, the Salvation Army, and local church groups set up temporary shelters, food stations, and medical aid centers. Volunteers came from nearby counties and even neighboring states, bringing everything from bottled water to chainsaws. Many areas remained without electricity for several days, and some residents had no access to clean water or basic supplies. In cities like Little Rock and Covington, public works crews worked around the clock to clear roads of debris and restore access to emergency services. Mobile command centers were established in parking lots and schoolyards, coordinating rescue efforts and distributing relief supplies. In Wynne, Arkansas, the high school gymnasium was converted into a shelter, offering cots and hot meals to hundreds of displaced families. Local businesses and grocery stores, even those damaged in the storms, donated food and supplies to support recovery operations. Officials from the National Weather Service continued surveying the tornado paths, using drone footage and satellite imagery to map damage tracks that stretch for more than 100 miles in some cases. In Illinois and Indiana, meteorologists confirmed several long-track tornadoes, with wind speeds reaching up to 170 miles per hour. The extent of the destruction led to multiple tornadoes being classified as EF4 on the enhanced Fujita scale, indicating devastating winds and widespread structural failure. FEMA teams worked with state and local governments to assess damages and process aid applications. Temporary housing was arranged for those who had lost their homes, with federal assistance covering hotels and short-term rentals. Insurance adjusters flooded into affected towns, but for many residents without coverage, rebuilding would depend heavily on state grants and charitable support. Mental health counselors were also dispatched to provide trauma care, especially in areas where fatalities had occurred. Throughout social media, images of collapsed buildings, overturned vehicles, and debris-covered streets were widely shared. Fundraising campaigns quickly gained traction, with millions of dollars donated within days. Celebrities and athletes with ties to the region voiced support and urged the public to contribute. Despite the devastation, stories of survival and neighborly heroism began to emerge. Residents who pulled strangers from the rubble or gave up their own supplies to help others. The response was not without challenges. Remote communities faced delays in receiving aid due to blocked roads and damaged communication lines. In some towns, looting became a concern, prompting curfews and increased law enforcement presence. Still, for many survivors, the sense of unity and resilience outweighed the setbacks. Town halls, churches, and school fields became gathering points, not just for supplies, but for hope. As the recovery entered its first week, emergency officials warned that the long-term process of rebuilding homes, businesses, and infrastructure could take months or even years. The April 1st outbreak had left a scar across the heartland, but it had also sparked one of the largest coordinated disaster responses seen in recent history. Across all affected states, the message was clear. Recovery would not be easy, but no community would face it alone. In the weeks that followed the April tornado outbreak, the focus slowly shifted From emergency response to long-term recovery, entire neighborhoods had been wiped away, leaving behind only foundations and piles of splintered wood and twisted metal. Across multiple states, local governments declared states of emergency and launched rebuilding initiatives, some of which would span several years. Town councils began drafting rebuilding plans with input from engineers, architects, and residents, balancing safety with the need to restore schools, homes, and small businesses. In hard-hit towns like Sullivan, Indiana, and Amory, Mississippi, the scale of destruction brought renewed conversations about storm preparedness. Communities discussed adding more public tornado shelters and improving warning systems, especially in mobile home parks and rural areas where residents had fewer safe options. Some survivors lobbied for updated building codes that could better withstand future storms, including stronger roofing standards and anchored foundations. These policy discussions reflected the harsh reality that this type of violent weather may become more frequent due to climate change. At the federal level, members of Congress visited affected areas to tour the damage firsthand and assess funding needs. Emergency funding bills were proposed in both the House and Senate, aiming to support housing assistance, infrastructure repair, and mental health services. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration announced plans to enhance radar coverage in certain underserved areas after reports surfaced that several communities had received little or no warning. Simultaneously, meteorologists continued to study the atmospheric conditions that produced such a rare and destructive early spring outbreak. Meanwhile, nonprofit organizations remained on the ground. Habitat for Humanity broke ground on its first replacement homes less than 1 month after the storm. Faith-based groups offered counseling, clothing, and labor for cleanup efforts. In many towns, high school students and local sports teams became the backbone of volunteer work, removing debris, delivering meals, and helping their neighbors reclaim what little was left. The recovery effort wasn't just about repairing buildings, it was about restoring a sense of community and identity. For many survivors, however, trauma lingered. Mental health clinics reported surges in anxiety and PTSD cases, especially among children who had hidden in closets or crawl spaces during the tornadoes. Support groups formed organically where residents could share stories, fears, and hopes for the future. Some families, unable to bear the emotional weight of staying, relocated entirely. Others vowed to rebuild on the exact same spot, determined not to let the storm define their lives. By the end of April, most of the debris had been cleared, but the physical and emotional scars remained. Signs of recovery, new mailboxes, fresh lumber stacked in yards, reopened schools, were slowly replacing scenes of devastation. The April 1st tornado outbreak would go down as one of the deadliest and most widespread of the decade, but it also revealed the resilience of communities in the face of chaos. From Arkansas to Delaware, people had endured unimaginable loss, but they had also proven that even in the wake of disaster, hope could still take root. As rebuilding continues, the lessons from this event will likely shape how future generations prepare for severe weather. Stronger warnings, better infrastructure, and community-driven planning are already taking root. The storm may be over, but the impact and the will to overcome it will be felt for years to come.